around the world, and thank you for joining us once again on truth2u.org. That's truth, number 2, letter U.org. It's Season 2 of Torah Pearls. I'm Jono, and joining me in the virtual Truth to You studio all the way from Ireland is Jason of spiritualbabies.net. How you going, mate?
Doing well.
Nice to hear your voice again. And in Indonesia is the author of Let's Get Biblical. Why doesn't Judaism accept the Christian Messiah? Volumes 1 and 2. You can get a copy. You can get a copy on Amazon. You can get a copy on his website, which is outreachjudaism.org. That's outreachjudaism.org. Welcome back to the program, Rabbi Tobias Singer.
Hey, great to be back.
It's wonderful to have both of you gentlemen. Thank you for being patient while I moved house. One of my favorite things to do in the whole world is pack up all my belongings and move them to another house and unpack them. I just could do it every week.
Now you know what it's like to be a Jew. You're always on the road.
That's true. That's true. Oh my goodness, I'm glad it's over. But yes, dear listeners, thank you for being patient. Had to move. And, you know, Jason wasn't feeling well. Are you feeling better now, my friend?
Yeah, I am. Yeah, I'm ready to go.
So we missed last week's Torah Pearls, but we'll catch up again next year. Now we are in Tavo. Now, Tavo, it begins in Deuteronomy chapter 26, verse 1.
Right.
It begins like this. And it shall be, when you come into the land which the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance, and you possess it and dwell in it, that you shall take some of the first of all the produce of the ground, which you shall bring from that land, the land that the Lord is giving you, and put it in a basket, and go to the place where the Lord your God chooses to make his name abide. And you shall, now Tobiah, you shall go to one of the priests in those days and say to him, I declare today to the Lord your God that I have come to the country which the Lord swore our fathers to give us. And then the priest shall take the basket out of your hand and set it down before the altar of the Lord your God. And you shall answer and say before the Lord your God. Now, this is what I've got in my New King James Study Bible, this Christian translation. This is what I have, Tovia. My father was a Syrian about to perish, and he went down to Egypt and dwelt there, few in number, and there he became a great nation, mighty and populous.
Okay,
let's stop there. Let's stop there. Now, two questions, obviously.
Yes.
Saying to the priest, the Lord your God.
Right.
Secondly, my father was a Syrian, Tovia.
Yeah. So we got to open this all up. The last Torah portion, incidentally, is the record breaker. Kiseitse had over 70 commandments. There's no portion that has that many commandments. This portion we're going to right now has only 2, and this is the commandment called Bikurim, the first fruits. And this has been the theme since we have gone to Torah Pearls 2.0, and that is the connection between the land and God, heaven and earth. And the person who has the first fruits, the farmer has to bring these first fruits to Jerusalem and make this declaration. Now, what is he talking about? Who is our Aramean? Like, where does that come from? And what is the blessing? And what is he replying? So this is a reference to someone who we've discussed many times. Who is this Aramean who your father worked for?
I don't even have Aramean. I've got Syrian. And then it says, my father was a Syrian.
This is why when people ask me, can I take a King James Bible in the bathroom, I tell them that the question you should be asking is, can you take it out of the bathroom? So that's the proper question. Are you allowed to remove it from a bathroom? So the word is Arami, Ovid, Avi. That means in Aramean. This is very, very famous. This is an event that occurred, and that is that Jacob, who is our father, it's not fathers, but father, who worked for the Aramean. Who was the Aramean? Who was the loved one. Now, what is happening here is critical. This goes back to the very, very beginning. God makes promises to Abraham. But now, as the Jewish people are about to go into the land of Israel, everything is going to gel, going to solidify. The Jewish people are going to observe the Torah. They're going to be priests to the world, which we'll talk about soon. And all the promises will be fulfilled before our eyes. But the Jewish people, it's a contract. This is a bridge. twist, a covenant that's going to come here, and it's two-sided. On one side, God kept his promise, and on the other side, we must keep our end of the covenant. Now, let's think about Lavan. What happened with Lavan? Lavan was the one who tricked Jacob, and Jacob wound up marrying Leah first instead of Rachel. That's what happened. Mm-hmm. Eventually, everything from that single event, everything unfolds from there. If it hadn't been for Lavan, things would have gone in a completely different direction. Mm-hmm. If it hadn't been for Lavan, for example, Jacob would have married Rachel first, not Leah. Imagine that for a moment. Imagine if Jacob had not been tricked. Now, at the time, it was a catastrophe, I would imagine, for Jacob. It was but imagine if it didn't happen. That means that who would have been the first wife? Would have been Rachel. She would have been the wife. Who would have been the firstborn? It would have been
Joseph.
Oh, if it would have been Joseph who was the firstborn, would the other brothers have likely been envious of their brother? No. What does that mean? If they wouldn't have been envious, they would have never sold him into slavery. If they never would have sold him into slavery, he would have never wound up in Egypt. I want to go through this, sweethearts, because this is very big in what we are seeing in the news today. I want you to follow and see what God has done. And this is what's going on. If he would have not been sold to slavery, he would not gone to Egypt. He had not been in Egypt. He would never been working for Potiphar, whose wife tried to seduce him. He would never wound up in prison. He would have never wound up becoming the viceroy of Egypt because he gave a Pharaoh, they interpreted his dream properly, and then he would have never been enabled the Jewish people to save the Jewish people and save this family and bring them down to Egypt, where they eventually be redeemed. Now this is unbelievable, which means that sometimes we see things. Like just now in the news, the Obama has now got all the Democrats he needs to pass this Iranian thing. It looks terrible. But what we are declaring here is that we sometimes don't understand history, but now when we can look back at all history and see what has gone, we realize it really was all a blessing, but at the time we couldn't know it. And that's what's being declared over here, that really God, that he took my father. This is the declaration that now think about this. This is agricultural. You're in the land. Moses is not going to accompany them. He says, when you go there, take your first fruits. Bring them in a basket to Jerusalem. Don't go eating it right away. Bring it. That in itself is a declaration. Standing there with your fruits in your basket. Right. And then you have to make this declaration that God kept all of his promises. And here you see what happened. Look at the passage. And there we became a great nation, great and mighty. And then what it says in the next verse 6. And the Egyptians saw us and they oppressed us. And then what happened? That God saved us, God redeemed us. So what I've spelt out for you, that it all was triggered by an event, which at the time seemed like a disaster, but turned into, it really was the trigger that brought about our salvation, is what must be declared by the person who's bringing, this is called Bikurim, from the word Bechor, same word, means the first fruits that are brought forth to the Kohen, to the priest. It's an obligation. And then once a person brings the Bikurim, the first fruits, which is really of the 7 species, then the person is welcome to go and enjoy their produce and so on. But the first fruits have to go to the Kohen. It says to the Kohen of that time, because as our sages expound on this, that it's true at this time in the Torah, the priests were very, very holy, very righteous people. Sometimes the priests weren't the best people, but it made no difference who it was. The priest is the one who it has to be brought before.
So now you bring it to the priest. Now, it just seems a little interesting the way that it says that you shall say to him, I declare today to the Lord your God, when you bring it to the priest. It notes here that the Septuagint reads, my God, the Lord my God. Is there anything in that, or is this just a little thing?
No, not at all. First of all, whenever it says the Septuagint says, so you have to know this is nonsense. Mm-hmm. Because if whoever put that in there has a copy of the actual Septuagint, then he's a billionaire, because no one has it. That means whoever put that in here, whoever put that in there, he's either making it up or he has a copy of something that no one in the world has. The Septuagint was lost. Septuagint was burnt in a fire in the Alexandrian library and all it up. No one has that. So what you have is Greek, later many Greek translations, and those Greek translations, of course, play with the text all over and try to make it and so on in different ways and so on. But in fact, the Kohen has a unique relationship with God. Remember, the Kohen has a special on his forehead for God. That
the crown. Yeah.
Therefore, it's not that. So the priest represents God, not a God in a Christological way, but he is the one who blesses the Jewish people, who is the one who represents God's will. And therefore, you give it to the priest, and therefore, it's not any God. It's not the God or the banana God or the monkey God. It's the God of Israel. It's the one that you, the sons of Aaron, are the ones that are entrusted by God. And that's why it says that he says, I declared. That's why I use the word I declared, because actually bringing the first fruits to the Kohen in itself is a physical declaration. Here it is. I have brought this before. For what reason? And I make this declaration. Now, this is the declaration from one side. We're going to go to the second declaration. Is going to come up in just a moment.
Yeah, so it says, let me just read from verse 9. So it talks about how he was mistreated in Egypt, how God brought them out of Egypt. In verse 9, he has brought us to this place and has given us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. And now, behold, I have brought the first fruits of the land, which you, O Lord, have given me.
Right.
Then you shall set it before the Lord your God.
Right. Just so you see that what was explained in the beginning of this show, that we're starting with what does love and have to do with it, we're seeing the Torah outlining precisely what I've shared with you. That is precisely that one trigger. And again, we're seeing things all around us today in Iran, in the United States Senate and Congress, that we're going, oh no, this is terrible. Like, is God going to break his covenant with Israel? Will Iran be able to destroy Israel? God is with you. Do not be afraid. Even though it looks bad, it'll turn out for good. We can now, in hindsight, look back many times and identify this. Many people may not realize what was involved here. We have the Mishnah describes this in this was a massive celebration. Bear in mind, you had farmers, whether they came from the north and done all the way down to Beersheba, anywhere, and very often it was a very long journey. They would come in huge, long caravans. In fact, there was so many people that they had to, people had to stop off and then bring them in, and there was rejoicing and singing. This was the Bikurim, this offering was a massive celebration and a recognition of God's presence. You may not be able to apprehend that by looking at this, but just think about this. That means every farmer throughout the land of Israel, following Shavuot, had to bring a portion. The minimum was 1/60th of your harvest had to be. And so imagine, that means thousands and thousands and thousands of farmers were coming up to Jerusalem. You couldn't do this back at home down in Beersheba. You couldn't do this up in the Golan Heights. You had to be in Jerusalem and coming into the temple to be able to bring this. Thousands of people would be there. This was a massive event of an enormous scale. Just understand, with tremendous celebration.
And so it says, you shall set up before the Lord your God and worship before the Lord your God, so you shall rejoice in every good thing which the Lord your God has given you and your house, you and the Levite and the stranger who is among you. And it goes on to say in verse 12, when you have finished laying aside all the tithe of your increase of in the third year, the year of tithing, and have given it to the Levite, the stranger, the fatherless, the widow, so that they may eat within your gates and be filled, then you shall say to the Lord your God, I have removed the holy tithe from my house, and have also given it to the Levite, the stranger, the fatherless, the widow, according to all your commandments which you have commanded me.
Right.
I have not transgressed your commandments, nor have I forgotten them. I have not eaten any of it when in mourning, nor have I removed any of it for unclean use. nor given any of it for the dead. I have obeyed the voice of the Lord my God. I have done according to all that you have commanded me. Look down from your holy habitation from heaven and bless your people Israel and the land which you have given us, just as you swore to our fathers, a land flowing with milk and honey, Tobiah.
Oh, okay. I thought you said
the third year, the year of tithing.
I got to explain this all here for a moment. Okay. So there's a whole, just so you understand what's going on. So now we have the other end of this. First we have the person bringing Bikurim. This is the second of the two commandments, the only two commandments in this week's portion. In the second one, a person we know has a whole series of tithes. So you had to give a tithe to the Kohen, to the Levi. There was a special tithe called Ma'aser Sheni, which is a tithe which you actually ate, you had to eat, and you couldn't be. This is where the references to the dead. When you ate the Ma'aser Sheni in Jerusalem, you had to be in a state of complete purity. You couldn't be impure. You had to give a tithing to the poor. You had to take care, which we're still responsible for. The other tithings we don't do today because we don't have the temple and so on, but we still are obligated to give to the poor. So what happens is, the question is that now, how long? God doesn't want you to go, okay, I'll keep taking off, a tithe, but I'll leave it in my garage and let it sit there for a while. So the answer is, how long do you have? So basically, we see here in the Torah, a person has 3 years to take care of this. You cannot have tithes and go, well, I got these tithes that's still been sitting for 18 years. You can't do that. So at the end of the maximum of the 3 years, a person has to take care, make sure that everyone has received their proper tithings. And then there's this other declaration. And this other declaration is very interesting because if you look at verse 15, it says, Hashkifa mimoin kochecha. Min hashemayim. Now, the word hashkifa is a very interesting word. It's not a word most people will recognize, but it means examine from examine. It's actually used usually in a negative way. For instance, God looked down from heaven at Sodom, or the angels looked down to Sodom. It's usually used in a place of judgment. But what the person is saying is, look, I'm clean. I have fulfilled my end of the covenant. Please examine. That's what hashkifa means, look down. But the word implies examine that I have kept the commandments. I have taken care of the tithes. I have been clean, meaning in a clean state for the Ma'aser Sheni, the second tithe, and so on. And therefore, please, God, bless the people of Israel, the land that you gave. And you notice here, incidentally, heaven and earth. We're going to see later on, we come to Azino, we're calling heaven and earth as witnesses. Because heaven and earth really are always the witnesses here. Not you're going to go to hell, you're going to go to heaven, something that's untestable, you can't see. And that's what also Isaiah is going to begin in the beginning, that, give testimony, heaven and earth. Heaven and earth are the ones that give testimonies. We'll see, because the earth will not give its fruit, the heaven won't give its rain, and so on. So therefore, hashkifa means the person is saying, Hashem, I have in fact fulfilled my obligation, and I kept my end of the covenant. And that's why this, we're going to get to it now, but that's why this fits perfectly with what we're about to encounter in the second half of this portion, which is, again, the covenant. We keep our side, God keeps his side, we keep our side. But if that's broken, then things will go terrible. And that's why this fits. That's the symmetry of Parshas Kisavo. People may look at it as a disconnect. We have two agricultural commandments in the beginning. What does it have to do with this incredible blessings and the most horrific curses anywhere in Scripture? How are they connected? They're completely connected, because you have the two declarations. One is God kept his promise, even though Lavan, the Aramean, tried to trick your forefather. It all led to a blessing. God, now I recognize it. And now I know that everything is from you. Even the things that will look terrible are all blessing from you, and I recognize it. Here are my first fruits. So, second, I am now keeping my end of the covenant. That's how this is like music. So the return is the second commandment. I have kept my end of the covenant in that I have tithed, I have fed the hungry, clothed the naked, take care of the poor. I've given my end, done my end, and therefore hashkifa, therefore look down from your holy place, from heavens, and bless the people. That's why this fits seamlessly with this very shocking chapters, passages that are going to follow now of the blessings and the curse. That it's two-way, and that's why this matches what's about to follow.
Jason.
I just wanted to kind of go over something that I've been thinking about for the last few months. And the subject is what's the obligation and what's the... See, we look at the word mitzvah and we think mitzvah is like a good deed, and that's kind of what it means really. But if you're obliged to do that good deed, how good is that deed really? And what extra can we do on top? And what I find really interesting is the level playing field that the text offers everybody to do as much good as they can. So in the text, we already know that God says, set aside the corners of your fields, and the poor and the widow, they can come in, or the widow's family can come in, they can glean these fields so they can get their own food for themselves and work for it. And the vineyards, you don't pick everything from the vineyards. You don't pick it dry, so these people can still go in. And there, at the beginning of chapter 26 and 12, we see when you've finished all the tithes, then you shall have some for the Levite, which is fair enough. But the stranger and the orphan and the widow, surely we've looked after them already.
Oh, because you're saying they're already catered for within the Torah, and yet there's provision here in this tithe.
Well, there's provision in this tithe for extra provision for the stranger, the orphan, and the widow, but also for the people that don't have vineyards and fields, right? Supposing you breed goats and you're like, well, I'd really like to help feed as well as clothe, and this gives the ability for the person to do that because it allows the person.
That's a really good point.
He's not limited by the obligation of the one to say, well, no. And this came up because I was talking to a friend of mine, Rabbi Neely, about the tallis. Okay, and I said, well, I see a lot of Jews wearing the tallis today. But the obligation isn't to wear the tallis. The obligation is that if you have a garment with four corners, then you wear the zitzio on the four corners, and therefore you turn the garment that is already normal part of your life into this thing. And I said, I don't understand how that is. How can you translate that into today's clothing when the garment is really something that you wear that's functional, and the tallis isn't that? You wouldn't choose to wear a tallis today if it wasn't for the commandment. So it feels a little bit backwards. And he explained it in kind of a similar way, that the commandment doesn't say you must wear a four-cornered garment. It says if you have a four-cornered garment. So people choose to have a four-cornered garment so they can fulfill the mitzvah. And that's kind of what's happening here, I think. For the people that don't have a field and don't have a vineyard, they still get to be included in the really important things about living in a community, the homeless, the widows, and the orphans. And I just thought that was really lovely that it comes up here as part of a tithe for everybody.
It's a really good point, because I'd never thought, how do you glean a goat after it's already been milked, for example? It's a really good point. That's fair enough. Tovia.
Yeah, well, this is referring to the Meiser Ani, the tithing that was given to the poor. Even the shearings, tithing had to be given as well. And of course, the ger is included here. What does the ger have to do with this? But as it turns out, a person who converts to Judaism doesn't have a plot of land. And we see that the ger here, we saw it before, and we're going to see it very, very soon, are put together with those who are the vulnerable members of society, because they don't have their own land. They don't have a nachla. They were able to live on someone else's plot of land and work the field. But ultimately, they had to be cared for because they didn't have what other Jews had, and that is their own plot of land. They had to be taken care of. And in fact, when the Jewish people, this is going to come up in a moment, thought that they were doing right by God by doing many other commandments, but they weren't caring for the weakest members of society, including the ger. Then in Isaiah, the worst things are told. God says, I don't even want the rest of this. That's the message. And this is what people forget, is this powerful message. And Jason's absolutely right. It's just magnificent, the mitzvah of wearing tzitzis, because if you don't have a full-cornered garment, you're not obligated to wear tzitzis. We actually voluntarily put on the full-cornered garment, which is not the normative cultural clothing that people wear today, so that we can fulfill a mitzvah, which in reality, if you don't have a full-cornered garment, you have no obligation to put one on and wear tzitzis.
Mm-hmm. Wow, really good. Boy, I'm glad you guys brought that up. It goes on in 16. This day the Lord your God commands you to observe these statutes and judgments. Therefore you shall be careful to observe them with all your heart and with all your soul. Today you have proclaimed the Lord your God's the Lord to be your God, and that you will walk in his ways, his statutes, his commandments, his judgments, and that you will obey his voice. Also, today the Lord has proclaimed you to be his special people, just as he promised you that you should keep all his commandments, and that he will set you high above all the nations which he has made in praise, in name, in honor, and that you may be a holy people to the Lord your God, just as he has spoken to you.
We're going to see in a moment, I'm not going to give it away, but we're going to see in a moment, this is a very critical passage, because the passage is conveying that somehow the way the Jewish people behave, particularly in the land of Israel, is vital as a sign and emblem to all the nations of the world, to be a light to the world. And I'm going to see that just right now in the very critical curses that are going to come up, and you're going to see something very intriguing. But the reason all this, God, what does it mean when the Jews are chosen? The Jews are chosen to be a light to the nations, to be so that we can be richer than them. No, the Jews have suffered more than anyone else. The purpose of the Jew is to be an emblem to the world of how a firstborn son. This is how one is to behave, and one is to worship our Father.
Jason.
In verse 18, it says, and the Lord selected you on this day to be, and some people are going to find special, and some people are going to find peculiar, which I think is one of my favorites. But most people are going to find treasured people. And I find that quite lovely, in that when I was a little kid, I used to collect, and it sounds real weird, but snail shells, right? So if a snail shell, I found a really intact one and it was pretty, that would be my treasure. It wasn't any great monetary value, but I found it a treasure, and I love the use of that word. But I think, I've seen peculiar in a few translations, that they should be a peculiar people, and I kind of like that idea too, that they're different, different people, that you look at them and they're distinguished from other people. I kind of like that. But there's a reference that you can link that to in Exodus 19:5. It says that out of all the nations you shall be to me a treasure. That's lovely.
Right.
Beautiful.
That's the role of the Jew. But again, it is specifically that you should be an example to the nations of the world now in how to behave. And if you behave properly, then the nations, you'll be a Or Lagoyim, a light to the nations. That's the role. If you break that, and if you fail in that task, that mandate, and you choose not to be Am Segula, then you don't need to be in the land of Israel. Now that I'm going to throw you out of the land of Israel. So the consequences for being perched in that position are very high. No one, let it not be said that anyone has suffered more in the land of Israel than the Jews. The Jews have been expelled from that land many, many times over. So along with being a emblem and an example to the nations comes the consequences if you fail this test, and there's no need for you to be in the land of Israel, and the nation's going to suffer more than anyone will.
It goes on in chapter 27. Now Moses, with the elders of Israel, commanded the people, saying, keep all the commandments which I command you today, and it shall be on the day when you cross over the Jordan to the land which the Lord your God is giving you, that you shall set up for yourselves large stones and whitewash them with lime. You shall write on them all the words of this law when you have crossed over, that you may enter the land which the Lord your God is giving you, a land flowing with milk and honey, just as the Lord your God of your fathers promised you. Therefore it shall be that when you have crossed over the Jordan, that on Mount Ebal you shall set up these stones which I command you today, and you shall whitewash them with lime, and there you shall build an altar to the Lord your God, an altar of stones, and you shall not use an iron tool on them. You shall build with whole stones. Now, there's two things here. First of all, and we know that Joshua did do this when he crossed over the Jordan. But from an oral law perspective, Tovia, where it says, write on them all the words of this law. How is this understood?
That, in fact, not only is all the Torah, but you can see there in language very soon that you to write it in a way that's understood. That, in fact, not only was the Torah written, but in fact was written with 70 translations for all the different 70 languages of the world, that everyone would see and everyone would understand. And then you to coat it with a cement or a plaster on top of it so that it's protected, but anyone could peel it back and be able to examine the words and then place it on there. And this is very, very critical, because here it's said that when you come into the land, the Torah is written down and it's engraved in stone. These are stones that no metal tool could be used on it, and that's why it's like this is like just like any of the commandment of the stone altar that was used in the tabernacle in the temple, and everything was written down on it. It was written down the way that anyone could understand.
Jason,
I like this. It reminds me of passport control, right? When you leave your country for the first time and you go to somewhere that's very different. When we flew into Texas a few years ago, even though you think that we share a common language for the most part, and we know what's going on, but when we landed, one of the first things you see is you're now in the United States of America, and you cannot do this, and you can do this, and you cannot carry that, and you can carry this, and I feel that that's what this is like. They're setting up this zone where the people that come into this land have to understand what the rules of that land are, and they make it as obvious and clear as possible. It would be really interesting to find some archaeological remnant of these stones, just to see how they were done. I like to think that they were illustrated. Illustrated with a hand, and the hand's carrying a pig and a knife and fork, and there's like a cross through it saying no. And and sadly, there's nothing around at the moment. But one day, maybe. I mean, we're finding things all the time.
Well, I don't know that the detailed excavations have occurred on Mount Ebal, but there is they know where the altar is, and it can be visited. We won't be going there on our tour because it's not the safest place to visit. Tovia, is that correct?
Right. You'd need a military escort to go there.
We don't have one of those, even though we have Jason. But
we have Jason. So when we come and say we have Jason, well, hopefully we can
to hide behind.
Yeah.
So we'll see. We won't be. But they do know where the altar is, right? But anyway, there is that. Now,
I'd like to thank the Oslo Accords for that. That was really brilliant. Prior to this, you can go any of these places easily.
Yeah, right.
Oh, yeah. I used to go shopping in Ramallah all the time. It's not a problem. You can walk there from Bethel. You just walk into Ramallah and go shop. You could walk into Gaza. Gaza was nothing. There was just one thing like on a highway with a pole up and down. You walk through, in, out, not a problem. But now we have the Oslo. We have peace, and now peace. We can't go there. Okay.
Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah, it's great.
Right, moving on. Verse 11. Okay, and Moses commanded the people on the same day, saying, These shall stand on Mount Gerizim to bless the people. And when you have crossed over the Jordan, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Joseph, Benjamin, and all these shall stand on Mount Ebal to curse Reuben, Gad, Ashur, Zebulun, Dan, and Naphtali.
Tovia, is there any specific reason that they were divided that way?
I've researched it. So if you look at the families, those, I just want to make sure we get the translation correct. Elu Yamdu Yivarchasom Al Hagrizim. Shimon, so the ones who are on Mount Gerizim, where the blessings are from, is Shimon, Levi, Yehudi, Yisachar. Those are all from those are all descendants of Leah. The Yosef. Now, notice that yes, there is a reason why Yosef is chosen here, is because Levi is included. The other children that go on Mount Ebal, who are going to respond to the curses, we have Reuven, but Reuven is a problematic son in that he's the firstborn, but he's made many mistakes. And we have other children here, but these other children are from Bilhah and Zilpah. So you have it divided in an unusual way. There is something I think people are going to notice. So, Joe, I just want to highlight it now. When you always have to have 12 tribes. When Levi is included, and given that Levi needs the blessings like everyone does, and they have to follow the Torah, so Levi's included, and we don't have Ephraim, Manasseh divided, but rather Joseph is there as a single, as a tribe. But also the elders of the Levites, that means the elders went down in the valley between the two, and they were there with the Ark of the Covenant, and they would make these declarations, these 12 declarations of curses that we're going to see in a moment, and try to figure out what is the common thread that moves through these 12 curses.
Okay. Well, this is what it says from 14. And the Levites shall speak with a loud voice and say to all the men of Israel, and here's the first one, verse 15, cursed is the one who makes a carved or molded image, an abomination to the Lord, the work of hands of the craftsman, and sets it up in secret. Now, each of these curses, by the way, are followed by the phrase, and the people shall answer and say, Amen.
Always have to ask questions like, why are these? What we're going to have here is 12 curses. Why don't we have don't rob a bank? Like, how did these curses get in here?
Yeah.
Why isn't homosexuality going to be in these curses? But there's going to be incest in here. That means there's a very important thread here. Why isn't curses the one who doesn't keep the Sabbath? Why isn't that?
I was just going to say, why isn't that there?
Got to examine this, my friends. This is humongous. Now, also one other thing. Listen carefully, Kindlach. There are two words for bless, as you know, we've talked about it many times. The kalel means one kind of curse, which means done with, but orur is curse, but orur means that there is an underlying messages that the person should, of course, repent, because or means light. So arur ha'ish, which means cursed, but also the person should repent and do tshuva. Let's take this very first one, because everyone should ask one humongous question. What question would you ask about verse 15? Verse 15 is what? What exactly?
Cursed is the one who makes a carved image, a molded image, an abomination to the Lord. Well, this is against idolatry, right?
No, because it is. Of course it is. But it's a special kind of idolatry. Because what does he do? Read the end of it.
Sets it up in secret.
Oh, what is that? Well, okay. That is the big clue on everything that we're about to read. This is not a general... Of course it's forbidden. I am the Lord your God. I have no other God. These 12 are all the kinds of sins that a person outwardly... I'm living a beautiful life. No one is seeing. I go to synagogue. But in secret, in his closet, he's got a little idol. These are the kinds of sins, number one, that people don't see. For example, we're going to have a person who's going to make... Curse is the one who mikhaleh.
Someone who's a little bit too kind to their pet.
Pet?
Yeah, the pets.
What pets? Their father.
Okay, we're going to get there. We're going to get there. These are the people with these are the people with the skeletons in the closet, right?
Oh wait! Sorry. You're way ahead of me. Okay, so the person makes light of his father and mother. I mean, does not accord them the proper honor. Nobody sees that. In the middle of the night, you have a neighbor and you have a landmarker. But quietly, secretly, what do? You move the landmarker so nobody sees. That means be very careful, because God sees everything that's going on. And if you think you're going to outwardly, that's the whole Isaiah chapter 1, you're going and screaming and hisses all your things, but quietly you're living a completely different life where you're quietly stealing from your neighbor. You've got an idol, but this is not a general prohibition of idolatry. It's curses a person who secretly has the idol is hidden. Why is incest mentioned here? Why not other sins? Incest says, for instance, curses the person who sleeps with his father's his father's wife, as an example. And then then it brings in curse the one who commits the act of bestiality. Clearly, the Torah is saying, in case you don't get how evil incest is, it is just like wicked as bestiality. But the key is, when you're at home and no one's watching, who's at home with you? Your family, right? You're alone. So therefore, this sort of sexual immorality is the kind of immorality that people never find out about. It becomes this family secret of shame that is hidden. In contrast to this, take someone sleeping with a married woman and so on. In those cases, a person has to make all kinds of arrangements. They have to meet at the Holiday Inn. It's a whole big thing. No, these are the things that could all be done in quiet, because it is natural and normative that people are alone with their closest family, and therefore watch out. And therefore these are all coming up here. The other thing that all these curses, if you keep going here, what does that mean? Cursed is the one who hits his friend stealthily, in secret. So that's number one. All these are, what is the guy who takes the judge? Lokayach shochad, who takes bribery. A person doesn't take bribery in public. A judge takes bribery under the table. That's where the money comes in. And so therefore, this is the great crisis. Don't even dare try to pull this off. God sees everything. There is something else that's very delicious, and that is that all of these commandments, think about them. Are they obligatory on a non-Jew or not?
Oh, well, that's a good question too. So, well, they're spoken to. The children of Israel are speaking them back and forth.
Yeah, but think about all these sins. Think about the 7 Noahide laws, which is really about 69 laws. If you look carefully at these, you'll notice something very interesting. All the commandments that are selected here are commandments that a non-Jew is obligated to as well. Bestiality is forbidden to a Gentile. Incest is forbidden to a Gentile. A Gentile has to have, it means if you are going to see, this is so delicious. This ties together with the passage that Jason identified. I said, give it a moment, and you're going to see what it means. You are to be a treasured people. What do treasured people mean? Treasured people means that you are the nation to which all other nations will look to know how to worship God. If Shabbos was brought here, if Yom Kippur was brought here, if eating pork was brought here, so that has nothing to do with you being an emblem to how non-Jews should behave. Why? Because they're not obligated to keep those commandments. So there's two features to these curses that we have here. Number one is these are all things that are done quietly. Incest is the kind of thing that no one finds out. It's the highest shame. Bestiality. No one has to know about it. There's no arrangements. You don't have to arrange to meet with your donkey at the La Quinta Inn. I'm sorry. I don't mean to do that, but it is. That's what's going here. Be careful, those who do not judge. Look, by the way, Ger Yosem Valmona. This is what I was talking about in verse 19. The Ger, the proselyte, the orphan, and the widow. You see, they're bunched together. The Ger were people who were on the edge of society. God warns us many times, be very, very careful in protecting them, because they're the most vulnerable. So number one is these are all secret sins that people don't see, and you see it right in the beginning. It doesn't say there, curse is the one who just worships idols. It's the one who does it in secret. This is the worst possible thing to do. Second thing is, this connects seamlessly to being an Am Segula. What is it? The whole idea is that all these things are prohibited to a non-Jew. All of these fall into the 7 Noahide laws. Every one of them. A non-Jew is not allowed to worship idols. A non-Jew is not allowed to sleep with a sister. A non-Jew is not allowed to have an unjust court system. They must have a just court system. That's the 7th of the commandments. And therefore, this connects to, what does it mean you're to be treasured? Like we get like special bonus? But no, it means you're representing, you're God's firstborn son. What does that mean? Why is the Bechor, the firstborn, given double portion of the inheritance, because he represents the parents of the younger children, and therefore be very careful how you behave. And you think it's in secret, God is watching, God sees everything. And that's why specifically Noahide laws are brought here, and Noahide laws that can be done in secret.
So let me understand then, verse 26, if these are laws for all the nations, and we get to verse 30, the last curse, cursed is the one who does not conform to all the words of this law by observing them, and all the people shall say amen. Now, all the words of this law, is it just the from verse 15?
No. This is
verse 26. What does this mean?
This is all the Torah. Now Paul is going to play a game here with this.
Well, he does in what is it, Galatians chapter 3, I think.
The key is what the text. I want to read the Hebrew to you, so it's a person should understand. Or ashalo yokim is divrei haTorah hazois, which means curses. Now, the Christian translation, I don't know how they render it, who does not observe or keep, I don't know what but the word is yokim, means who doesn't establish the commandments of all the Torah to do them. What does it mean, establish? It's a very strange language. Established means that if a person says you don't have to keep a mitzvah, a person says this commandment is not really from God, if a person is going to cherry pick and say this is not the word of Hashem, a person says that's a person who says I accept that the whole Torah is from God. Does it mean that a person would never sin, would never make a mistake? Of course it doesn't mean that. It's, if I wanted to become a citizen of Australia, right, I'm sure I would have to take a series of oaths at some stage to gain citizenship. And what is that says is I swear, I vow to what? Uphold all the laws of Australia. I'm guessing something along those lines, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How come it doesn't say, Australia doesn't make a new citizen say, I swear never to break a law? There is, no country has that. Every country says, I will uphold it. That means that I am buying into the whole system. I accept all the laws of Australia, and that I know that they are the right thing. It doesn't, but a person will make a mistake. A person will not do there's no question that people will do something wrong, but I swear that I accept all the Torah is the word of God, and this is proper. It's not saying that I will never make a mistake. And the Torah provides provisions that if a person sins, depending on the type of sin, how to repent of that sin. But if it's very different that if a person sins because they erred, or a person sins because they say, I don't believe it's from God. That's a whole new ball game. If you say that I don't accept this is from God, or I don't accept the reign of God, then you're at war with God, and then you're under this curse.
Okay, so now, you mentioned Paul, so let me just read what he said in Galatians chapter 3, verse 10 and on. It says, for as many are of the works of the law, they're under a curse. For it is written, cursed is everyone who does not continue in all things which are written in the book of the law to do them.
Right. So he does not have the word establish. The key point, what Paul is doing is, I'm using the word brilliant in italics. Paul is setting up a scarecrow, and toppling it. It's not real. The commandment is, cursed is the person who says it's not from God. I don't have to keep it. I don't accept the Torah. That's what the word is, to establish it. Paul can't have that. Paul has to explain that the law is a curse and nobody can keep it, and therefore don't bother. And then all of Galatians 3 really is to say, all you have to do is have faith, and that faith, which is the earlier covenant, that's all you have to do. And he brings the proof from this. It's a complete misreading of the text. And in fact, if we were to accept what Paul says, and how do you explain King David's forgiveness? How do you explain Nineveh's forgiveness? How do you explain Menashe? And nobody, I don't care if you listen to the show, I don't care what you've done wrong in your life, no one has done things as wicked. No, you've never come close to Menashe. He repented, and God forgave him. Now, if God can forgive Menashe, he can forgive you. So what does that mean? That means that what Paul is conveying in Galatians is opposed by the prophets of Israel. That's precisely the point. The point is, if you say, if a person gives into their weaknesses, into their Tavos, into their desires, so God says, look, I can forgive you for that, and God does forgive people for that. But if you deny it and says, this is not from God, or I don't accept it, then you're cursed. That, because you don't establish these words and accept them, that I recognize that these laws are directly from God. That's what it says. Yokim, who does not say. You won't find a translation for this in Galatians 3. Paul has to strip that out. His point is, by the way, I want to make a point here on the Christian Bible. I disagree with the exegesis that many people have on Matthew 5:17. Many people say, oh, Jesus says that, I didn't come to destroy the law, to keep the law. If you don't keep one jot, one tittle of the law. And most scholars line up on this, and I'm sure you've had the same. You say, you see there that somehow Matthew is advocating that you're supposed to keep the law, and therefore many people feel that this statement in Matthew 5 contradicts Paul. As some Christian scholars have said, if you put Matthew and Paul in a room alone, only one guy would come out alive.
Well,
Nonsense.
this is okay. So you're quoting from the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 5, verse 17, 18, 19. Where Jesus seems pretty clear to say that even the least of the commandments you should be keeping and teaching, and those who do not do so shall be called least in the kingdom of heaven, whatever that means.
Unless your righteousness exceeds those of the Pharisees. Now, look at the whole sermon. Now, what does it say? That even if you feel anger, if you feel lust, as if you murdered, as if you committed adultery. Matthew, everybody's got it wrong on this one. Matthew is not saying that you're supposed to keep commandments. What is really, if you look at the Sermon on the Mount, what is in view there is that this is the standard you have to keep. You not only have to keep commandments, you have to keep commandments more aggressively and zealously than the Pharisees, more than them, and even if you think about it, you're ready as if you did it. What does that mean? It's the same thing as Paul. It's saying you can't do it. By the time you read it, you're going, wait, I could perhaps not commit adultery. I could be faithful to my wife, but not feeling for a moment lust in my heart, that's inconceivable. So therefore, it really is what Matthew is setting up. In my opinion, I think everyone's wrong on this one. What Matthew is setting up is you can't keep the commandments. So, and this is the setup. Are you going to be able to fulfill what we are told Jesus said? I don't think I believe Jesus ever would have said anything like this. But what Matthew is setting up in a very elaborate sermon, much more elaborate than what Luke has in the plane, is that, in fact, no one can do this. Matthew and Paul are conveying the same thing. What Matthew is doing is a storytelling, which is all the Gospels do this, not in this kind of aggressive creedal statements of Paul. And Paul is saying this is the law is a curse, you can't do it. It's only by faith to be saved. They are really the same. It's a big misunderstanding that Matthew somehow was a Lubavitcher who said that you have to keep the commandment. That's not what Matthew is going on. Matthew does not care about people observing commandments.
Taking into consideration that Matthew was written after Galatians as well. Jason, you were going to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to take my own swing at 27, 26, because he does not uphold the whole words of the Torah. So when you were asking Toby the original question, I kind of got in my mind that the question that some people may be asking from home is this. And I'm going to forfeit the who is Israel question because that's a show on its own. But there may be people at home who say, look, I'm Israel, and it clearly says here that I have to do all of the Torah and fulfill it, right? And they're going to read that as, therefore, I'm obligated to do all of the commands. But on top of what Toby's obviously just said, much of the Torah simply doesn't relate to everybody that's listening. So there are commands for the Levi, there are commands for children, there are commands for parents, there are commands for farmers, and commands for people that have vineyards, there are commands for men and commands for women.
For women, yeah.
You accept, as Toby said, the whole of the law, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you get to do the whole of the law.
Most of the commandments have to do with the whole nation, corporate Israel, the commandments. The key point is this, that what is being conveyed here, that every Jew has to accept the validity of the Torah. That's what the word establish it. And one is forbidden to say that even one commandment isn't relevant. But the curse doesn't mean on any Jew who commits a sin. If the person, let's say a person here in Indonesia, so as I'm going into the mall, which is below where I live, there's a big pork store. In Indonesia, it's unusual. They have a big sign. But anyway, I think pork looks disgusting. But this place, they kind of grill it in a certain way, and they have it hanging. Let's say it's a Korean shop that has pork all over the place. So let's say I go, oh man, that looks so good. The mall closes at 10 o'clock at night when no one's looking. I can't. I pass by this pork. It stares at me every day. I have to eat it. I'm not saying that I don't believe the Torah is from God. I am giving in to my lust and to my desire. So therefore, I'm not saying the Torah is not from God, just as somebody who sins in other ways. They're not saying the Torah is not from God. A person, however, is breaking down in their state of weakness. So therefore, what we're seeing over here is that you must establish this, that we're saying that all the Torah is from God, and we establish it's from God, and everything is relevant, and a person is cursed if they say, no, you don't have to keep. That was back then in the old days. Today you can get married, you can marry, you whatever it is. That it's not relevant today. That was 3,000 years ago. Not today. We see a lot of that. That's if you do that, then you're in very serious trouble.
Blessings on obedience, chapter 28. I love the way this begins. Now, let me just I'm going to read the verse before it again. Cursed is the one who does not confirm all the words of this law by observing them, and all the people shall say, Amen. Now it shall come to pass, if you diligently obey the voice of the Lord your God, to observe carefully all his commandments, which I command you today.
And again, I apologize. This, so you know, the words are important here, because it says here, V'hoya im shemaya tishma, that if you will listen to the voice of God, Elokecha your God, lishmar lasis is called mitzvah, and that is to guard, to do all of his commandments that the Lord has commanded you. So that's what we'll do. We'll say to guard it, to understand that it's valuable. You know, I just have to do this for a moment. There are food, because this may be subtle, and you can't miss this point. We're told by doctors, nutritionists, and everyone, there's certain foods that are healthy and some foods that are not healthy, okay? It's not healthy to eat steak all day, and it's healthy, you know, it's not healthy to smoke cigarettes. It's not. But let's say you'd have a person who goes, I need a cigarette, and have a cigarette. If a person says, look, I can't control myself, I needed the nicotine, right? So they're not saying that smoking doesn't cause heart disease and cancer. They just gave in. They're not denying the principle of medicine or of all the research that's been conclusive that there are 250 carcinogens in a cigarette. They're just saying, I gave in to my desire to have a cigarette, or to God knows whatever else. But imagine how different that is when the person says, I think all that research is a bunch of lie and bunk, and cigarette smoking is more healthy than jogging. So then the person is completely off the wall. That's exactly what this means. It means that you're denying the validity of the principle. It doesn't mean that you'll never make a mistake. You make a mistake, the Torah has all kinds of provision for the mistake, but don't say it's not from God.
Excellent. That's very good.
Okay? I had to explain that point.
And it goes on to say that the Lord your God will set you high above all nations of the earth, and all these blessings shall come upon you and overtake you because you obey the voice of the Lord your God. Verse 3, blessed shall you be in the city and blessed in the country. Blessed shall be the fruit of your body, the produce of the ground, and the increase of your herds, the increase of your cattle, and the offspring of your flocks. Blessed shall you be your basket and your kneading bowl. Blessed shall you be when you come in and when you go out.
I'm just going to comment on this. This is what we are now encountering is the blessing and the curse. There is what appears to be a parallel chapter in the Bible, and that's Leviticus 26, which also has the blessing and the curse. You ask, what is the distinction between them? They're enormous. And the very big one is that in Leviticus chapter 26, we have the blessing and the curse. Yeah. It's spoken in the plural, that God is speaking to the entire nation. And therefore, it's going to speak a little differently. All this, it doesn't come across in the English translations. Almost all of it, except for exceptions that I'll point out to you, is in the singular, speaking to an individual in the singular. And therefore, I'm talking to you right now. Be careful how you act. Be careful what you're doing. This is coming from the mouth of Moses through God. Be careful how you personally act, because either the heavens and the earth will give forth blessings, and we're going to see tremendous 98 curses that are going to come here that are going to be shocking.
Yeah, no, but there's so much more detail and in the cursing there. I mean, we're halfway through the blessing already. It says that the Lord will cause your enemy who rises against you to be defeated before your face, and they shall come out against you one way and flee before you 7 ways.
Think about that, sweethearts, because, we are at a very big advantage now where we're living in this time. We are very likely living in the midst of messianic prophecies that are unfolding before our eyes, given everything that's happening around us now. So, but, you think about like what happened in the 67 war as an example, where the little Israel went and defeated the Jordanians did exactly how they came against Israel. They started shooting missiles from one spot. The Israelis went in, and the Jordanians just fled in every direction, and they just fled in every way. And they were so confused that at the time, he was the chief rabbi of the IDF, Shlomo Goren. He thought the Hebron had been liberated. He went there on his own to go make sure everything was taken care of, and they all surrendered to the chief rabbi of Israel. The IDF didn't even make it there. I just want to pause. We're about to see blessings that make complete sense to us. And I have to say, in praise of our great-grandparents, they read these passages too. But they didn't have the hindsight that we have today. Because we've seen this in our eyes, where all the enemies of God, they went running from the nation that emerged from the ashes of the Holocaust, and we've seen the horrible curses that are really, now we can only understand. So imagine how much faith a Jew had to have 200 years ago in Hungary, in Munkac, in Budapest, that they had to read this and go, like, what really horrible thing, what really are we talking about? What do you mean they'll run from you in 7 directions? Today we see this all before our eyes. We're seeing miracles. And right now, I know that you, my brothers and sisters, are nervous about Iran. Don't worry. God has a plan for it. Just trust in Hashem. And that's what's very key. So we're seeing the blessings here. The blessings are in the land. Look what the Europeans are doing. They're boycotting Israel's what? Their fruits and vegetables. How did that happen? That Israel should export it. That's the blessings that are happening.
That's it. The Lord will command a blessing on your storehouses, and in all to which you set your hand, he will bless you in the land which the Lord your God is giving you. The Lord will establish you as a holy people to himself, just as he swore to you, if you keep the commandments of the Lord your God and walk in his ways. Then all the peoples of the earth shall see that you are called by the name of the Lord.
That's key.
And they shall be afraid of you, and the Lord will grant you plenty of goods in the fruit of your body, in the increase of your livestock, in the produce, in the of the ground and the land in which the Lord swore to your fathers to give you. The Lord will open to you his good treasure, the heavens, to give you the rain in the land in its season, and to bless the work of your hands. You shall lend to many nations, but you shall not borrow. And the Lord will make you the head and not the tail. You shall be above and not beneath, if you heed the commandments of the Lord your God, which I command you today, and are careful to observe them. So you shall not turn aside from any of the words which I command you this day, to the left or to the right, to go after other gods to serve them. Tobia.
Yeah, and we see this. I mean, how often do we see that? Ben Gurion, who said, it's not important what the nations say, it's what the Jews do. When the God gives the nation of Israel the blessing, so then, yeah, it's true that Ronald Reagan said, don't you dare go attack Iraq, and so on. But Israel was the head and not the tail. And then all the nations stood back. All these things that Israel did, the world just stood in shock and awe. But when Israel acts weak and turns against God, then Israel becomes the tail, and all the nations are wagging the Jews around, and the Jews then are and that's what's going to come into view right now. All this we have seen with our own eyes.
Now, here we have the curses, and the blessings, it's half a page. The curses go on for about 2.5 pages, And Toby, you might want to summarize that, but I'll just highlight one verse, and that's almost in the middle of the curses, verse 37, and you shall become an astonishment.
Perfect. You want to know something unbelievable? So I was thinking to myself that's the passage I want. It's so important that I want to do beautiful. Go ahead.
It says, you shall become an astonishment, a proverb, a byword among all nations where the Lord will drive you.
Yes, that means you literally, you will be, it's like, I don't know if they have it in Australia, Jeopardy. They have the game show they play.
Oh, the game show? Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so you say, a nation that's persecuted, a nation that's been exited. So they go, who are the Jews? That means the Jews have become, we see this, by the way, in Psalm 44. We are cursed all day long, all the nations. We become a byword for a persecutor. When you think about a nation, who has been persecuted, who has suffered, you will become a shock. The world will be horrified by what you will do, and you'll be lemushel. It's like the book called Mishlei, meaning of Proverbs. You'll be an example, a parable. That means you suffer like the Jews. The Jews will be the paradigm of a nation that suffers. That's how all that. And what is so interesting here is the Torah is guaranteeing in a moment, I won't utterly destroy you. You could have been very great in number. You'll be few in number. So the author of the book, who could have written this? Only God, because it's saying you're going to endure things that are so horrible. It says you won't even believe what you're seeing. You'll go crazy. So the Torah almost is taking a step back and saying, I can't even describe to you the sights you're going to see. But he said, Meshuggah, and you will go crazy from seeing. We now know what we now can see the images that are unimaginable, that astonish the world. And therefore, this is the reason why, I'll just say personally, but I think the reason why people of faith are not rocked by the suffering of the Jew is because it comports with the Torah. That means even though I can't explain the Holocaust, who would dare do that? I can't explain that, but I can say this, that if in fact the Jews had not suffered unimaginable suffering throughout history, I would then question the veracity of Torah. So therefore, there's a Yiddish saying, you don't die if you just can't explain everything, because these are not existential questions. As it turns out, the suffering of the Jewish people, the Torah predicted precisely that would happen. And therefore, as a person of faith, I have to ask one question. Are the events that have unfolded before my eyes, both the unimaginable horrors of the past and the great miracles that are unfolding in our eyes now, does that comport with Scripture, or is it disconfirmed by the Bible? The answer is it's fulfilled. In contrast, you look at the New Testament, many of the general not pass, all this nonsense, none of that's filled. But here we see that exactly this is why people who are of faith, who know Scripture, of course we want to see all the blessings, we want to repent. But our faith is not shaken by the horrible things that have happened to us in the past. Why? Because exactly what the Torah says would happen. And whoever wrote this book could have only been God, because who would predict that the worst things, you'd be the most persecuted people in history, you'd be exiled from your land, everything that will contribute to the demise of a nation will occur to you, but you're going to still be an eternal nation. And we see that, of course, also in Leviticus 26. And therefore we know that this is from God, and therefore it doesn't shake our faith, because as the Torah says would happen.
If we had died out, this is no longer valid. If we were great in number and popular, this is no longer valid. But after 3,500 years, here it is still.
Yeah. Right, that's true. If the Jews would be the most greatest thing and no one would ever curse our name, and Jews would never go, you could take the Bible and throw it in the garbage. If the Jews disappeared, the Bible is worthless. Well, the Torah we see is predicting these are unimaginable, saying, but you are an eternal nation. But the key is that we have to be a treasured nation because the whole world is looking at you. And this connects to the curses we saw earlier, the 12. And then those are not Shabbos and keeping the holidays. These are specifically those things that the nations have to watch you. And if you do that, you're going to suffer tremendously. And you're going to suffer from the non-Jews.
With verse 37 in mind, I'm just going to continue from 64. It says, "Then the Lord will scatter you among all the people from one end of the earth to the other, and there you shall serve other gods, which neither you nor your fathers have known, wood and stone." Now, you mentioned, you highlighted that last time it was mentioned. Just give it to us again,
well,
wood and stone.
I mean, this is not typical. Now, first, one of the Nachmanides famously explains that, in fact, there are two of these blessings and curse chapters. The one earlier, Leviticus, in a way, is speaking of the Babylonian exile, which was nothing compared to this exile that we're in now. Normally, when the Torah says you worship other gods, it's gods of gold and silver. But But here we're dealing with an exile that's so horrible, so terrible. And there you'll worship God's unique wood and stone. There's no gold and silver here. And in Jewish traditions, wood represents wood. Therefore, there are two religions dominant in the world, and that's the religion that is the religion represented by the cross, the wood, and the religion that's dominated, that's represented by the Kaaba, by the stone. And therefore, there is in a tradition, and this is an allusion to the two religions of the second exile, which would be much, much more horrific, which we have endured now for 2,000 years.
Yeah, and it goes on in 65, "And among those nations you shall find no rest, nor shall the sole of your foot have a resting place, but there the Lord will give you a trembling heart, failing eyes, anguish of soul. Your life shall hang in doubt before you, and you shall fear day and night and have no assurance of life. In the morning you shall say, oh, that it were evening, and in evening you shall say, oh, that it were morning, because of the fear which terrifies your heart, because of the sight which your eyes see." Oh my goodness! And the final verse of the chapter 28.
This is read quietly, and the reader of the Torah reads this kind of a little bit quietly. People listen to it, but people start crying. I've witnessed this being in the synagogue, and if this is read properly, people start crying. This portion of the Torah, incidentally, was engineered by Ezra, so it's always read 2 weeks before Rosh Hashanah. Always, no matter what, any year you want. This Kisavo is always read before Rosh Hashanah. Obviously, so that people would repent. Obviously, that people would prepare themselves for the day of judgment. Just so you know, this is the portion has to come out before Rosh Hashanah every single year.
"And the Lord will take you back to Egypt in ships, by the way of which I said to you, you shall never see it again. And there you shall be offered for sale to your enemies as male and female slaves, but no one will buy you."
They won't even want you as a slave. I mean, you're going to be completely worthless.
Hey, that's the way that the curses end in Deuteronomy chapter 28. Chapter 29, "These are the words of the covenant which the Lord commanded Moses to make with the children of Israel in the land of Moab, beside the covenant which he made with them in Horeb. Now Moses called all Israel and said to them, Now you have seen that the Lord did before your eyes in the land of Egypt to Pharaoh and to all his servants and to all his land, the great trials by which your eyes have seen, the signs and those wonders. Yet the Lord has not given you a heart to perceive and eyes to see and ears to hear to this very day." What does that mean?
Well, that means that what's happened is that you have made grievous mistakes in your life, and be careful because you've been given an ear. It means this is very much like what you find in Isaiah chapter 43, that you've been given an ear, but make sure you use the ear not just to physically hear sounds, but to in fact listen, to inculcate these teachings and to listen to his voice and to follow in his ways. So make sure you use your ears not just physically, but also spiritually.
Okay, because we understand that, I mean, we read on a number of occasions in Exodus that the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart. That's not what we're looking at here. It's just that it says, yet the Lord has not given you a heart to perceive and eyes to see, ears to hear to this very day.
I kind of look at that as, you know how Tavo was saying that sometimes we see Israel going through these horrendous things, and we really only understand the purpose of those things when we get to a certain point that we can look back. And so I think that while Israel was receiving some blessings which they looked at grudgingly. The manna in the desert, they were complaining about the quail, which they complained about they got and made them sick. This is slavery. There's all these things that happened to them. And now I think they're at the point where they can look back. And up until this point, they couldn't retrospectively understand what was going on. But now they can. And they can see that there's
a critical juncture now. Right.
Right. Mm-hmm. There are blessings and there are curses. And these are all dependent on how they live their lives. That's how I read that anyway.
And just to highlight, Jason says, imagine if we could go back in history to the time of the first temple, and we had this Torah in front of us. We really would have no idea the full force of what's being conveyed here. We had no idea. But now we're living in a time where we can where virtually all of human history is behind us. And now we can look back and say, wow, all of this now really makes sense. That no mind, no ears could possibly have apprehended what we now could see because we see it before us today.
Verse 5, I have led you 40 years in the wilderness. Your clothes have not worn out on you. Your sandals have not worn out on your feet. Nor have you eaten bread, nor have you drunk wine or similar drink, that you may know that I am the Lord your God. And when you came to this place, Sihon, king of Heshbon, and Og, king of Basan, came out against you in battle, and we conquered them. And we took their land. We gave it as an inheritance to the Reubenites and to the Gadites and to the half tribe of Manasseh. Therefore, keep the words of this covenant and do them, that you may prosper in all that you do. That's where our Torah portion ends.
Just a little point here. I mean, you could see why the portion ends here in verse 8 of chapter 29 and doesn't end at the end of 28, because portions of the Torah, with one exception, end on a positive note. And therefore, just as, a parent scolds the child and may smack a child or punish a child very severely, at the end of the day, the parent kisses the child, says, I love you, and whatever I punished you, all these horrible things I care about. Portions end differently. So you see how this is divided up. So look, here's the whole picture. I really loved you. I brought you through the wilderness. I took care of you. You saw it with your own eyes. You saw it. You heard it. You experienced it. Now would you consider devoting your life to the covenant that I'm making with you today?
There it is. Jason, parting thoughts.
Yeah, I just wanted to paint a little really quick picture. We read there that their clothes didn't wear out and their sandals didn't wear out, and that this is somehow a sign that they've been looked after by the Creator. And it reminds me of 2 Kings 5, when Naaman goes to Elisha to get healed of leprosy, and Elisha won't leave his house, right? He says, go off and submerge yourself 7 times in the Jordan, and Naaman's really annoyed, right? I was going to say another word, but he's really miffed. He's like, there are better rivers where I come from. But the reason Elisha doesn't come out is because he doesn't want Naaman to think, Elisha healed me, right? And in the same way, I think that we've got an instance here where Israel is being shown in a very physical way that nothing they did fed them, clothed them, or protected their feet. It was all the Creator. And there's a little mirror there of those two stories. And I thought I'd share.
Very good. Thank you, my friend. That's good. Now, listen, before we go, just a quick public announcement for everybody. We are going to Israel this coming November, in the first half of November, beginning on the 2nd. And there's been a couple of spots that have opened up. Some people, due to health reasons, have had to pull out of going. Now, if there is anyone out there that would like to join us, Tovia, Jason, myself, Ross Nichols as well, we are going to Israel for, 10 days? The details are on this post. You can click on the link on this post. But if you would like to come, you need to pay straight away, $2,195. This is the final call, people. If there's anyone else who'd like to come, there's just a few spots available, and so there will be a link on this post if you would like to do that. Excellent. Thank you, Jason of spiritualbabies.net. Spiritualbabies.net. Now, just really, really quickly as well, I got to say, Jason, you're one of my favorite artists of all time. You really, really are. And I just wanted to, because I've been looking at some of your stuff lately that you've been putting up that I see on Facebook. Can you just tell everyone where they can see your art and where they can buy it?
Right, so I share a lot on Facebook, but I've got kind of a digital area on a really big art site called DeviantArt. DeviantArt. It's all one word. And I've got a profile on there. You can literally put in DeviantArt/spiritual babies, and you can find all my stuff. And you can then, via the website, you can purchase that as kind of a print or a canvas in lots of different sizes. And I get a little cut of that, comes to me. The rest goes to the website, but it doesn't matter. I like the idea of people hanging it in their homes. If people want to support me,
he said he likes the idea of people hanging him in their homes. Is that what he said?
But people are free to go and check that out, and if you can support me that way, then I'm very appreciative.
And did you just say, by the way, that you can purchase it in canvas, not just print, but in canvas?
Yeah. So some of the work I do it looks kind of two-dimensional, right? So the stuff I do on Photoshop, for example, comes out very flat. But I also use a program called Art Rage, which imitates paint and paint strokes. And sometimes when you get that on canvas, it looks like a regular painting rather than a digital print.
No, I got to get that. That's brilliant. That's awesome. So I'm going to put a link on this post for that as well. I don't think we mentioned it enough. In fact, I think that's the first time we mentioned it. So thanks for that. Also, tobiasinger.tv, where you can see all of Tobia's videos. They're all there collected in one place, tobiasinger.tv. Don't forget, dear listeners, Let's Get Biblical. Why Doesn't Judaism Accept the Christian Messiah? Volumes 1 and 2 by Tobias Singer. You can get that on Amazon. You can get it at his website, outreachjudaism.org. Outreachjudaism.org. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming back on. Until next week, dear listeners, be blessed. Be set apart by the truth of our Father's word. Shalom.